Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment and give you my thoughts. If you joined us live, super happy to have you. If you have any comments or questions during the show on any of the topics I'm going to cover, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it and respond to anything as we kind of go. Tonight's going to be a little bit different since it was like a very slow news week last week, except for one really big story, and I'm going to start off with that after I do the box office. So basically what I'm going to do is after story number one is kind of like an Ask Me Anything kind of thing. And by some people I mean one person has sent in some questions for me to kind of get my thoughts on certain topics and just things about myself. So if you have any questions that you want me, like, or topics you want me to cover tonight, feel free to drop them in the chat, and then like at the end of the show, depending on like what time it is, I might kind of answer some questions on the fly. I haven't really prepared much for these questions. I kind of want to just give like my unfiltered thoughts on them. If you haven't already, please like the live stream. It's super really helpful for the algorithm and things like that, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're watching this after the fact, super happy to have you as well. There should be time codes in the description by the time you're watching this. We stream this every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And again, please like this video, and if you have not and you've stumbled upon this, welcome to Cinema Mancuso. Please subscribe. It really would be a huge help. We're trying to grow. Trying to grow so I can monetize this shit, because I've done this for like 4 months now, 5 months, and I love doing it, but it's like rushing home from work and I'm high. It's like for my one viewer. So anyway, that's enough of my complaining. Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. So total domestic box office was there's more to that segment. $156 million. So it was actually a 1% jump. So we basically have held around, because last week it was like a 0.5% drop. So we basically held and hovered around this 150 number for like 3 weeks now. So we've definitely started to come out of this slump that we had following the strikes, which itself was following a slump from COVID. So definitely, Inside Out 2 really has saved the summer movie season and quite possibly has saved Hollywood. And not only is that an animated movie, but then the number one movie this week, opening, is Despicable Me 4, coming in at number one, bringing in $75 million. That pretty much tracks with most people's projections. I had projected it to be about $60 to $66 million. So, it definitely overperformed based off of my expectations, but I think maybe I just gotta get out of this projection business, because I'm not always wrong, and when I am wrong, I'm not like super off, except for Inside Out, where it was like I said it was gonna be like 50 something and it was like 130 something. So in any case, though, this was made for about $100 million, and it's already made. Another note: I'm only looking at like the normal weekend. I'm not. Sometimes if you go like on box office websites or the trades like Variety or Hollywood Report, like they kind of look at it like because the 4th of July was on a Thursday, they kind of look at it as like this big long weekend, or like from Wednesday, because I like Despicable Me 4 open on a Wednesday. I'm only looking at it as a traditional weekend, from Friday to Sunday, right? So even though it made $75 million for those 3 days, if you include Wednesday and Thursday, so far its domestic total is up to $123 million for the weekend, and domestically, I should say, and $230 million worldwide. So it's already doubled its budget. I would say it's already broken even. It's already a success for Illumination, and only in its first weekend, right? So it's gonna keep getting better as we go along, presumably if it can hold out, which I would imagine it will, since I think families have had enough of Inside Out 2, and now they're ready to make this one kind of like a big player for the next couple of weeks. Also opening this weekend, we had Maxine with 3 X's, right? The third installment of like the X Pearl Maxine trilogy, if you will, coming in number 4, bringing in about $6.7 million for the weekend, which was within my projections. I had said it would come in around $6 to $8 million. So that is reassuring to me. So And so far it's made about 7.8 million worldwide. So again, this is not going to be a huge moneymaker, nor was it ever, I think, intended to be. I think those first two were so beloved, especially Pearl. People were talking about Pearl like it was like one of the best movies of the century, which I thought it was a little overrated. From what I've been reading about this one is getting not mixed reviews, but like good reviews, but nowhere near like Pearl. I think Pearl was like lightning in a bottle. I think Pearl was better than these other two, and I think it was that moment that it came out felt like a cultural moment. Or at least a film Twitter cultural moment. Of course, it was not a huge movie by any stretch of the imagination. And then at number 7, we have Sound of Hope, which is it's a like kind of independent film, though I don't know if it's quite independent. Oh yeah, it is. It was done by Angel Studios, produced by Daily Wire. So it's, I don't really know anything about it, but it looks to be kind of a conservative movie. Sorry if that's where you're coming from, but that's not really for me. But it did break the top 10, right? So it's brought in at 7, and it's made about 3.2 million for the weekend. But it was off of a $8.5 million budget, and it's only made about 6.8 million domestically and worldwide. So there's still a little bit of a ways to go for this. Again, movies like this, I'm imagining making most of their money on VOD and streaming and things like that. Looking at films continuing this weekend, in its second weekend now at number 3, we have A Quiet Place Day 1, bringing in 21 million, dropping from second to third place now in its second frame. And this was a 60% drop. This is not the worst we've ever seen by any stretch of the imagination, but that is disappointing. If you're, I believe that's Paramount, right? That did A Quiet Place, yeah. So it's definitely not good to see, especially like this is gonna be a very crowded month. July, I feel like, is like really where Hollywood's really putting a lot of its eggs in the July basket. So it's gonna be interesting to see where it kind of falls week 3, week 4, week 5. But that's definitely disappointing to see a 60% drop. But this, however, it does, I would say it was still, especially because of last weekend's success and also worldwide numbers, this may not be like a flop by any stretch of the imagination, right? So this brings its domestic total to 94 million. So it's almost at that century mark, right, of 100 million. And it's made 178 million worldwide off of just a $67 million budget. So it's, basically it's definitely doubled its budget. I would say this one is definitely a financial success, right? It'll just be interesting to see when we're looking back on it if it's a success because it's able to kind of hold out for a long time, or if it's a big success because it had a pretty good performance opening weekend and worldwide. Also continuing this weekend, another little disappointing turn of events is at number 6, Horizon, an American Saga Chapter 1, bringing in 5.5 million for the weekend. It dropped from 3rd to 6th, so it dropped out of the top 5 in only its second weekend. This was a 50% drop, though. So not as big as Quiet Place Day 1, but also it didn't really make it didn't have as much to fall, right? So 50% is less, but it wasn't really making a lot to begin with. Whereas at least Quiet Place Day 1 had that big, strong opening. Big, strong, and thin quotes, but quotes. This brings its domestic total to 22 million domestically and 23 million worldwide. This is mostly getting play in the United States. And again, famously, this is like Kevin Costner's self-financed 2-part. And this movie's long, too. It's not even... I'm going to confirm how long this one is. Because it's not even like... It's 2 parts, but it's... they're each short. Like, they're each really long. Yeah, so this is Chapter 1, and it's 3 hours long, right? So the budget was like 50 to 100 million or something, right? So this is a long way to go to, be successful, no matter how you slice it, right? A couple other movies I want to point out here, continuing at number 2, losing its first place spot in its 4th frame, we have Inside Out 2, bringing in just a humble $30 million. This is about 48% drop, so you see, that kind of tracks with, where it is in its life cycle. And this brings its domestic total to 534 million and its worldwide total to $1.2 billion. It is far and away the most successful movie of the year so far, worldwide, and I believe domestically as well. And again, this is all just off of a $200 million budget. So Disney and Pixar are sighing it's a huge sigh of relief for them, right? This was really going to be a test of Pixar's vitality, and Disney's in a lot of ways. And even going beyond that, you know, the you know, mainstream Hollywood box office in general, right? So it's, you know, it's definitely, they're definitely, the people who made this movie and the people who make the decisions on what movies to make are definitely taking note of this. And one last little note here, we still have in the top 5, number 5, Bad Boys Ride or Die, bringing in just $6.6 million for the weekend, dropping from 4th to 5th, but now in its 5th frame. So this has been out for over a month. It's still in the top 5. And this was only a 37% drop. So talk about a movie that's just holding and just kind of bringing in that money. Again, kind of programming, because there's nothing really like it that's kind of competing with it. Kind of like a fun R-rated action film. Probably until we get Deadpool and Wolverine. But until then, this one probably, I think, has carved out a nice little niche for itself. It's made it about $177 million domestically and $360 million worldwide off of just a $100 million budget. So this has been a slam dunk financially for these filmmakers. Also, just want to do a quick note here. Our little, I'm trying to do this over the, I should come up with like a name for it. Maybe have like a little like slide just for this. But essentially, I want to just highlight the films that I've dropped out of the top 10. A little like, you know, 21 gun salute. We have at number 13, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, dropping out of the top 10 after being in the top 10 for 8 weekends. And at number 14, we have the Garfield movie, which dropped out of the top 10 after 7 weekends. So, goodbye, Fallen Brothers. But you had a pretty good run, especially the Garfield movie. The fact that that has done as well as it has, and stay in the top 10 as long as it did, is I think just speaks to the economic business side of Hollywood, where sometimes quality doesn't matter. Sometimes it really is about brand recognition. Sometimes it really is just about having something to bring your kids to, and that's all that really matters. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. So this is going to be like the one story I do tonight. If you're joining us late, it was a very slow news week last week because of the holiday, so I'm only doing this one major story. So if you have any, I'm doing kind of like an Ask Me Anything thing after I cover story number 1 here. So if you have any like questions or topics you want me to cover, I already have a few things kind of picked out that someone submitted. But if you have any on the fly, I'll try to answer them kind of off the cuff. So let's talk about story number 1. Really, story number only. So this is big news. If you've been following Cinema Q, so Notes on the News. I don't know why I started doing a Trump voice there. If you've been following Notes on the News, you know, everyone knows it. Everyone loves it. They say it's the best. I've been talking about Paramount getting bought, acquired, sold, merged, pick any verb you want. This is my very first broadcast. Originally, I was talking about Byron Allen, the media mogul who owns the Weather Channel, making a bid to buy Paramount Pictures, right? And for basically these 5 months that I've been doing this, every week or every couple of weeks, there'd be some story about this, you know, what's going to happen to Paramount. Well, it turns out, officially announced today, it had been kind of leaked leading up this past week during the holiday week, and it was officially announced, I think, last night, actually, on Sunday. Skydance Media will officially acquire and merge with Paramount Global. David Ellison, who's, you know, like the CEO and founder of Skydance, he's going to become the chairman and CEO. We have a quote from him here saying, quote, "This is a defining and transformative time for our industry and the storytellers, content creators, and financial stakeholders who are invested in the Paramount legacy and the longevity of the entertainment economy. I am incredibly grateful to Sherry Redstone and her family who have agreed to entrust us with the opportunity to lead Paramount. We are committed to energizing the business and bolstering Paramount with contemporary technology, new leadership, and a creative discipline that aims to enrich generations to come." End quote. So this is a very corporate speaky, but you know, he's doing a victory lap here. This is something he's been trying to do for like since I think 2023. Like he's been doing this for almost a year now. So in addition to Ellison becoming the chairman and CEO of this like new company that's temporarily being dubbed New Paramount, which actually isn't an awful name. If it's like, are you guys keep it Paramount, or are you gonna make it like Skydance Paramount, or whatever you want to do, New Paramount, or will it be like New Coke, right? Which ended up being like a marketing disaster. But in addition to Ellison, the president of the company is going to be former NBC Universal CEO Jeff Shell. He's the chairman of sports and media for Redbird Capital, and Redbird Capital is part of like the consortium that's partnering with Skydance to like by Paramount. Disappointingly though, so I didn't know, I never heard of Jeff Shell. Apparently he, like I said, he was the former CEO at NBC Universal. He was fired after a CNBC anchor accused him of sexual harassment. So, not great to see, people like this getting kind of rehabilitated and being brought back into the fold. But, that's obviously, I have no say in the matter. And then, of course, Sherry Redstone is like the central character of this whole story. So for context, her father, Sumner Redstone, had kind of built this media empire starting like the late 80s, I think. And then when he got too old, I think like in the late 2010s, like before his death in 2020, she kind of took over the reins. So a big sticking point was to make sure, like, okay, if we're gonna sell this thing, like it needs to go to someone that's gonna maintain the legacy that my father built, my family built, right? So we have this quote, ultimately she's giving up the empire that her family has held on to and has controlled for almost 40 years now, right? So we have a quote here from her in a statement, I think, to like Paramount Global's employees saying, quote, "In 1987, my father, Sumner Redstone, acquired Viacom and began assembling and growing the businesses today known as Paramount Global. He had a vision that content was king and was always committed to delivering great content for all audiences around the world. That vision has remained at the core of Paramount's success, and our accomplishments are a direct result of the incredibly talented, creative, and dedicated individuals who work at the company. Given the changes in the industry, we want to fortify Paramount for the future while ensuring that content remains king. Our hope is that the Skydance transaction will enable Paramount's continued success in this rapidly changing environment. As a longtime production partner to Paramount, Skydance knows Paramount well and has a clear strategic vision and the resources to take it to its next stage of growth. We believe in Paramount, and we always will." End quote. So again, lots of corporate speak, but again, kind of like sifting through the tea leaves here, or kind of like reading between the lines here, I think she finally found a deal, or rather even like the details of the deal that finally made this all make sense to her. And her primary goal seems to be she wants to leave. She wants Paramount to get better because of this, not stagnate or get worse, right? She doesn't want her legacy to be, oh yeah, Paramount was then sold and it was a disaster, right? She does not want that to be her legacy. So you definitely can get a sense of enthusiasm, and also kind of a level of trying to assure or reassure everyone else. And again, like I said, this temporarily being dubbed New Paramount, and the new company is going to be valued at around like $28 billion, right? So just a little bit of context of all this, right? I'm not going to go into it all. If you really want to hear every little detail of this M&A saga, this merger and acquisitions, soap opera, if you will, I have videos on it going all the way back to February, right? But the long and short of it is Skydance Media had always seemed to be the top contender, at least in Sherry Redstone's mind, because they have a working relationship. They produce, the Mission Impossible movies and the Top Gun movies, like Top Gun Maverick, most importantly. So they already have that working relationship, and Skydance seems to have the intention of kind of keeping the empire intact as opposed to like buying and selling it for parts. And it also didn't hurt that the Skydance deal would probably net Sherry Redstone the most money, personally, right? So they went back and forth for months. Other suitors came and went. And they were talking in April, and then it all kind of fizzled out in May and really fell apart in June. Where, the New York Times notes that, like, while Paramount's special committee of the board of directors was, like, evaluating the Skydance deal, lawyers from National Amusements, which is, like, the holding company that the Redstone family owns and controls, their lawyers emailed the special committee basically saying, pull the plug, like, you can approve it, but we're not gonna approve it, so you don't waste your time. Which was a big bombshell, at least for someone like me who's been following this, right? So it seemed like they were just gonna go it alone, right? It seemed like, they had the CEO had resigned, but kind of got fired, not really clear. And they had created this, like, office of the CEO with, like, these three different executives kind of doing it. And their primary goal being cost cutting, right? Like, it seemed like Paramount would, for better or for worse, just kind of go it alone going forward, right? And then last week, the proposed deal between the Paramount and Skydance came back to life, right? And people were excited. So the stock went up on the news. There was about a 7% increase on Wednesday following the news. I think the league broke on like Tuesday, right? And again, I had said this when the deal fell apart and the stock dropped a lot. And it's weird because Wall Street may not love this deal. There's a lot of concerns about shareholder revolt and potential litigation against Sherry Redstone for picking a deal that favors her over common shareholders. But at least the reason why the stock went down when the deal fell through was, okay, a certain bad thing is not as bad as an uncertain, unknown, kind of just like, well, what now? Like, what's going to happen? So so inversely, Wall Street may not love this deal, but at least a deal is happening, right? At least something is happening that could potentially improve the company, right? And then it was approved by the special committee, and again, the deal was officially announced on Sunday night. So it begs the question, why did they come back to the table? Because it seemed like by the time the whole thing blew up, it didn't seem like a negotiating tactic. And maybe those smarter, more experienced than me saw it for what it was, as a negotiating tactic on Sherry Redstone's part. But from the outside, it really looked like this was it. It was just irreconcilable. There was too many interests involved that you just couldn't square the circle. So why did they come back to the table? Well, Skydance. Well, I was about to say Skydance has more to lose, but technically Skydance has nothing to lose. Paramount has everything to lose because now it's in the same place it was, only now its reputation has suffered. Right? It's been beaten around this M&A whole thing for months now. But Paramount needs it more, but Skydance wants it more. And sometimes in negotiations, that can matter a lot, right? David Ellison really wants to fashion himself. I think he wants to step out of his father's shadow. So, of course, he's the son of legendary tech mogul Larry Ellison, who founded Oracle, which is like a software database company. I really don't know a lot about Oracle, but basically it's a really, really important tech company that powers a lot of business. It's one of those things like normal people might not know about Oracle, but if you're in business, you know about Oracle. I think David really wants to step out of his father's shadow and not just be, oh yeah, the film financier and producer, the son of Larry Ellison. I think he really wants to be like David Ellison, head of Paramount Pictures, or head of like a major studio and have that acumen, right? So it looked like he was willing to make the concessions, right? And it also didn't help that before this, the news stories that I was kind of collecting were all of these like stories about things Paramount is gonna do or planning on doing or considering doing. And one of them was there was talk of Barry Diller, who's like the famous investor and media mogul. There was talk of him potentially entering the fray to try to buy it because he used to actually run Paramount. And then I don't know a lot of the details, so forgive me. I'm a working man. I work full time in addition to doing this. So, but from what I understand, he was like the head of Paramount for quite some time, and then kind of lost out on control of it to Sumner Redstone, actually. So there was talk about him maybe coming in, and I'm sure Paramount's team used that as leverage, right, to kind of pressure Skydance to come back to the table with a better deal. So what's the deal? So what are the terms of this agreement? So Skydance and its partners, and like its consortium, right, like Redbird Capital, there's another group, but I don't know if he's part of Redbird Capital or another group, but Jeff Zucker, who is the former head of CNN, right, I believe, he's involved too. So he's kind of getting back into the media game. So Skydance and its partners will ultimately pay more than, about $8.5 billion per the Hollywood Reporter. The way that kind of is going to break down is about $2.5 billion is going to go to acquiring National Amusements, and I believe like after Sherry Redstone's going to net about $1.75 billion, right? The Redstone family. Another $4.5 billion is going to be for cash consideration for shareholders, so basically paying out existing shareholders for some, if not all, of their shares. And then about $1.5 billion of capital injecting into the company to add to the balance sheets to help pay down some of the debt. I think it has about like $14 billion of debt, right? So any extra money just to put into the company, so they don't have to borrow as much, right? It's gonna be helpful. I mentioned shareholders, so Class A and B shareholders. So basically, sometimes stocks have two different classes, and I don't know if it's always for this, but at least in this case, Class A gets to vote on stuff, has voting rights. Class B has no voting rights, right? So while National Amusements only has about 10% of the equity of Paramount, they own 70% of the voting shares, which essentially gave them control of the company, right? So what's going to happen is Class A and B shareholders are going to get $23 and $15 a share, respectively, right? Which, I forget what the original terms were, but this is much better than the original deal. So essentially, if you want to cash out, you'll be able to make a premium, right? Because right now, and of course this fluctuates, let's look up off the cuff. And I was going to do this before. I'm not unprepared. I'm doing this because it changes, obviously, as we know, with the stock market. So as of right now, at the time of this recording, around 6:30 on Monday, July 8th, Paramount Class A shares are about $21.37. So if you get a premium of $23, then you'd be getting a little less than $2 profit per share. And then with the Class B, right now the shares are about $11.21. You'd get a little less than $4 of profit per share. So, if you have a lot of shares, that could be valuable. I think it may be like a 30-40% premium, right? Another term of the deal is that National Amusements and Sherry Redstone would get better legal protections, right? So that was a big sticking point with the earlier negotiations. Because again, like I mentioned, a lot of shareholders, Class B shareholders, were like, Sherry, you're picking a deal that's going to disproportionately benefit you and disproportionately hurt us, right? And these aren't just like single investors. We're talking about like major funds and hedge funds and investment companies. And so there was a big concern that if Sherry Redstone just kind of like kept her head down and just powered through the deal, that she could face litigation, both the National Amusements and her personally. And I think that was a sticking point in the negotiations, and they basically wanted Skydance to help kind of pay for some of that if such legal issues do arise from a shareholder lawsuit, and Skydance wasn't willing to do that. Now they are, right? So that is going to be part of it. And notably, there's not going to be a shareholder vote, right? So even though Class B shareholders aren't entitled to votes, to indemnify herself or kind of insulate herself from any potential lawsuits, she wanted to put the deal to a vote, to essentially what you call like a majority of the minority, like put it to the Class B shareholders, just to see what they think, officially, as opposed to certain people complaining and threatening lawsuits, right? Again, the idea of that would to give the deal more legitimacy. Skydance really didn't want to do that because I think they correctly thought that it would get voted down. So that's no longer going to happen. Again, they don't need, National Amusements doesn't need that strategy anymore if Skydance agrees just to pay for any potential lawsuits, right? And notably, part of the deal, there's going to be a 45-day bidding period, right? To explore other competitive offers, right? Again, this is another opportunity to insulate National Amusements and the Redstone family from shareholder ire, right? The idea being, if they still go with the Skydance deal and people are mad, they could say, well, we looked at other options. We had this like month and a half to look at other options, and the Skydance deal still ended up being better, right? I think neither parties really wants to shop around. I think this is being built in to kind of protect themselves and say, in good faith, we didn't just do this deal because it benefited us. We did it because comparing all the deals, this was the best one. And notably, though, because this is, of course, if I was David Ellison, I would have pushed for this too. Because there's been so much drama, there's now also a part of this deal where Paramount will, like, if Paramount does decide to go with another group, whether it be Sony and Apollo Global Management or Barry Diller, any other potential buyer, Paramount will owe Skydance essentially a $400 million breakup fee. So that kind of, I think, if the idea is to make it seem more legitimate that we actually shopped around, I think a lot of shareholders could make the argument that, you've created a scenario where, of course, this is going to be the best deal, because any other deal is automatically going to come with a $400 million price tag on it, right? So, I don't know. I'm not a legal person. I'm not a financial person. I don't understand enough of the precedent with something like this, but that seems like that could be a problem. So what does Ellison want to do with this? Is it just for clout? Partially, yes, like I said. But I think he's kind of outlined a little bit vaguely, and then I think like literally today he started kind of giving a little bit more detail, but all of this is still vague, right? But he's outlined a few kind of points of like what his vision for this company, right? So one thing that was being batted around by Paramount sans Ellison, but he's reiterating, is looking into some kind of combined streaming service. Not a bundle, but like a combined service. Or at least bringing their content to another service, right? There was rumors last week. This is one of the stories I was also looking at doing before this one broke. The potential rumor of a merger with Paramount Plus and Max. Which I feel is a great match made in heaven, actually. Like, forget me as a consumer, like, this is awful because of the consolidation and the monopolies. But just from a business perspective and a branding perspective, Paramount and Warner Brothers both feel like they have a certain kind of historic cachet that the only other studios that would be 20th Century Fox, which is no more, essentially. And then Universal, but I feel like Universal has created such a different brand for itself. And not even different in that it's the opposite, but just like it has kind of reinvented itself time and time again. Whereas Paramount and Warner Brothers feel like classic Hollywood studios. So it wouldn't be strange to see their libraries side by side with one another, right? Where, as opposed to, it's weird when you go on Disney Plus. I don't know if it's on Disney Plus, but theoretically it could be because Disney owns Fox now, like 20th Century Fox. Like, it's weird to see Snow White and then see Titanic. Right? And of course, libraries are diverse, but I feel like Paramount and Warner Brothers would mesh pretty well together. And it would definitely benefit Paramount Plus because it's the worst streaming service. Full stop. Tech-wise, content-wise, it's the worst one. At least like the major ones. I'm not talking about like random ones that no one's ever heard of, right? So that's one kind of part. The other part is an increased focus on technology, right? Because, of course, his father is like this tech mogul. So could Oracle somehow become involved or just have a more tech-focused, way of doing business, which could be good or could be bad, right? Because tech companies are very different than entertainment and especially legacy entertainment companies. So, would that be kind of a breath of fresh air and kind of inject some new energy and enthusiasm into the system? Or is it just a complete misunderstanding of what makes companies like Paramount work? Who's to say? Another thing is, and this is of course like very corporate, and we'll see what happens with this, but he said he wants Paramount to be a, quote, creative first destination for storytellers, right? So the idea of being like, this is a place, maybe like a little subtle dig at like Warner Brothers, where it's like, hey, you can make a movie with us. We're not just going to cancel it even after you finish just to get a tax write-off, right? Like, the idea is to, like Sherry Redstone said, content is king. So the content should be the anchor of everything we do. It's not the thing, it's not a means to an end, it is the end, right? And everything else is the means to support the content, right? But then most notably, cost cutting, right? Again, this is something that the Office of CEO was already discussing doing. Variety reports that Ellison is eyeing about $2 billion worth of cuts. And the New York Times notes that, unfortunately, this will mostly probably be achieved with layoffs, which of course is not good. But whenever you have a merger, certain jobs and roles become redundant. And even on top of that, I mean, there's talk of, again, before this, there's talk of maybe Paramount selling off some of its assets, like Pluto TV, the streaming service, which seems really dumb because that's the streaming asset you own that's probably profitable. Like, if it's anything like Tubi, it's probably really popular. So I don't know why you would throw out Pluto and keep Paramount Plus, but that could be an option. Selling off any of these cable networks like BET, for example, the Black Entertainment Television Network, right? But that's obviously going to be something that they want to, now that they bought this thing, they want to kind of keep it lean and mean. So in conclusion, what happens now, right? So again, with this story, I can't say this is definitely happening. Every instinct in my body is telling me, like, this is it. This is what it's going to be. But knowing this story, of what we've seen, who knows? It can all be thrown out the window on Thursday, right? And furthermore, the Office of the CEOs have basically said it's, quote, business as usual, right? Until the deal closes. So they're going to basically be operating as if this isn't happening. Obviously, that's not really fair to say it that way. But, like, they're just going to try to stay the course as opposed to just being consumed with the merger and acquisition part of things. And of course, this still faces regulatory approval. This is like a huge industry business decision. So it's of course gonna the DOJ is probably gonna take a little look at this, right? The idea is that, assuming everything goes well and there's no hiccups or anything, this deal should officially close in the first half of 2025, right? But then again, just one last thing is like, could the deal be thwarted, right? other interested parties, like Sony and Apollo, maybe Byron Allen steps back in, maybe Warner Brothers steps back in, maybe Barry Diller really ramps up his efforts. They might try to use this obligatory bidding period window, offer a better deal that forces Paramount to be like, we gotta put this on hold because this deal is much better, whatever, what have you. But only time will tell. This is a very I'm like the Paramount. I wonder if anyone else on YouTube has been following this as much as me, because I feel like I maybe have found a niche following Paramount's merger and acquisition saga, if you will. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, so like I said at the beginning of the show, if you're just joining us now, I'll fill you in. This was a very slow news week this past week because of the holiday. So in lieu of my stories 2 to 5, I asked people to send in questions. Basically, ask me anything, right? Anything ideally related to film, media, and entertainment, but basically anything. And I got only one person submitted questions, and you know who you are, at Spencer Twitty, one of my most devoted followers on the channel. I really appreciate Spencer if you're watching. Sent about 6 questions, so I'm not going to be able to do them all. I'm going to try to do, I picked out 3 I really want to do, and then for like the story number 5 block of my show, I'm going to see if anyone else has any questions in the chat. Again, if you're watching this and you have anything you want to, any topics you're like, I wonder what Peter thinks about that, feel free to drop it in the live chat. If not, maybe I'll touch some of Spencer's other questions. But if it's kind of getting late, it's a gajillion degrees here in my apartment. It's so hot. I feel nauseous. I ran out of my Adderall, so I have a headache. I'm going through withdrawal. It's like this whole thing. My prescribed Adderall, I should say. I'm not admitting to illicit drug use. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Anyway, so let's kind of answer some of these questions. So Spencer asked, what films are you most excited for this and next year? So it's always interesting trying to get a sense of like looking at a release schedule and trying to say, okay, that's going to be the movies I really like and those movies I'm not going to like. Because of course, I can always be surprised, right? But then also, a lot of times, my favorite movies of the year ends up being... a lot of those movies that end up being my favorites of the year, they end up being smaller movies that wouldn't have been on my radar, may not have even been on a release schedule 12 months out. So oftentimes, like if I were to, I've never really quite made predictions like this, or being like, this is the ones I'm, think are gonna be really good. But with that kind of caveat in mind, here are the films looking at the rest of 2024 and 2025 that I'm most excited for. Most of them are because I'm actually excited to see it, and other ones I'm like, I wonder how that's gonna turn out. So looking in the near term, and this, I'm kind of surprised myself saying this, but when I was looking at the schedule, I was like, I am kind of excited for this. And that's Deadpool and Wolverine. I've never really cared for the Deadpool films. I think they're okay, but I've never thought they were as good, or even half as good as people make them out to be. But I'm really interested to see what the MCU does after having this kind of reset period, right? Number one. And number two, even though it is shallow for fan service and kind of undermines the ending of Logan, I am excited to see Hugh Jackman return as Wolverine, right? That was my generation's, Well, I mean, I really grew up in, the heyday of superhero films, or at least that beginning kind of renaissance period of the 2000s. But X-Men really was a huge staple of that. X2, X-Men United, right, is one of my favorite movies of all time, not just superhero movies. So I've always loved Hugh Jackman in the role. So it's a little disappointing to see kind of that emotional closure we got with Logan kind of undone. But from my understanding, this is a different version of Logan. But then at that point, it's what's the value then? He's not even really the same character. It's just the same actor playing the character, but a different version of him. I don't know. So that's something I am going to be interested to see near the end of this month, right? Another movie I'm very excited to see is Megalopolis. So this is Francis Ford Coppola's self-financed epic that he's been trying to make for 30, 40 years. And it premiered at Cannes in France, and from my understanding, it's very, very polarizing. It's either people thought it was the greatest movie ever made, or it's one of the worst pieces of shit ever conceived by man, right? So I'm always interested to see a movie when it has that, kind of gamut of opinions, right? I think if you go on Letterboxd, usually they have, like, when you see, like, a score and they show, like, the kind of the bar graph of, like, how people rated it, it's usually, like, a bell curve. This one is almost completely flat. Like, there's some variation, but it's, like, every possible star rating is well represented, right? I think right now it has a 3 out of 5. So I'm very interested to see how this actually turns out once, like, non-film critics, people who have the ability to go to con. I'm very interested to see how it plays. I know normal audiences aren't going to like it, but what about, like, the Letterboxd crowd, right? Like, that's just, like, cinephiles, if you will. Another movie I'm really excited to see is Nosferatu. So this is going to be, is it Robert or Roger Eggers? I'm totally blanking. Robert Eggers. So this is going to be Robert Eggers' new film. I was not a huge fan of the original Nosferatu from, like, the 20s, like the iconic horror film. I thought it was okay. I thought it was, like, a little overrated. But I love Robert Eggers' films. I love The Witch, and I love The Northman. I like The Lighthouse. I know people say, like, that's his best one. So I almost have, like, an inverted opinion about his movies. But I just find him a really compelling director. And I'm really, really excited to see him kind of return to more kind of psychological horror roots. And The Northman still kind of had that, but The Northman definitely was, like, a deviation from his, like, normal style. So I'm very interested to see how that turns out. I think it's coming out, like, the very end of this year. So looking into 2025 movies I'm excited to see, or maybe this is coming out in 2024, I can't remember. You never can believe this is coming out, and I'll believe it when I see it, because I feel like I've been hearing about this movie forever. The Passion of the Christ, Resurrection, Chapter 1. So this is going to be a sequel to The Passion of the Christ, the famous or infamous, passion narrative, passion play, if you will, that came out like 2004, right? And it's a huge hit, and it's still very popular with, like, the Christian crowd, right? And it was very financially successful, especially for an R-rated movie, especially at that time, right? So they're doing a 2-part sequel about the 3 days where Jesus was dead, and he's defeating Satan. So what I like the original Passion of the Christ. I don't think it's great. I think it would be great if it actually had, like, a vision, as opposed to just, like, let's just tell these events, like, in sequence. It didn't really feel like it had a narrative or thematic shape to it. But it was very much the conceit of that, or, like, the raison d'etre of Passion of the Christ, was to recreate the Passion of the Christ as realistically and viscerally and as essentially, to put it bluntly, gorily as possible, right? This is like a complete 180. This is, like, fantastical and metaphysical and spiritual. I'm very compelled to see what this is. I know Mel Gibson is canceled, and Jim Cazale, I think, is the actor who plays Jesus, is very much canceled. He's, like, very, very QAnon. He's gone off the deep end. But just as a Catholic, I'm just very interested to see what would this movie even be like, because we've never really seen anything like that. Two more movies I'm excited to see is Superman Legacy. I'm very, very excited to see what James Gunn does with the DCU. I'm not a huge fan of Guardians of the Galaxy. I liked his Suicide Squad movie. But everything I've been seeing out of this movie, whether it be pictures or news about it, it has intrigued me. It has piqued my interest, if you will. So I'm definitely interested to see that and really finally get a real Superman movie, because the last one we had was Man of Steel, which, even if you like that, I think we can all agree it was a deviation from, like, what Superman is in a lot of ways. So then before that, it would be Superman Returns, which I grew up with. And that was, like, 20 years ago. And a lot of people felt like that was just a pale imitation of the stuff from the 80s. Like, Superman does not have as rich of a cinematic legacy as someone like Batman. So it's going to be just exciting to see a new big screen Superman movie. Now, will it be amazing? Who's to say? And then finally, another movie. Again, there's a lot of superhero movies on this. Is the Fantastic Four. Again, kind of similar to my reasoning for Deadpool. I'm just very interested to see what lessons has Marvel learned, and how much damage control are they gonna do or not do? And if they don't do any damage control, that's gonna in some ways be even more interesting. So those are the films that I think I'm most excited for this next year. But sure enough, if I make like a best of 2024 list, I would be shocked if those movies are on the list, or rather, most of the movies on the list are going to be small things that I didn't even know existed until they came out. Okay, another question that Spencer submitted. Are the new products and features being branded as AI, are they truly AI? Are they truly artificial intelligence? Short answer is no. I feel like oftentimes the tech world will latch onto terminology from science fiction, the science fiction canon, right? Whether it be books or movies or TV shows or what have you. And then tries to use the branding, if you will, or like the positive associations with that word or that tech within that story, and capitalize on it. And sometimes they're so stupid they don't realize you're not supposed to like that piece of tech, like with the metaverse, where everyone was hailing the metaverse. That term comes from a book where the metaverse in the story is painted as like this dystopian thing. And artificial intelligence is no exception. So, going back actually for a second, so another example of a tech like that, and maybe this isn't really the same thing, and maybe I'm just getting really up in arms about it for no reason. It really bothered me when they invented like those, I don't even know how you would describe it. They're like, not a skateboard, but technically they call them hoverboards. But really you're just standing, it's almost like a Segway without the handle. That's not a hoverboard. You're just using the name hoverboard because people have always wanted hoverboards. A hoverboard is a board that hovers. That's just a Segway without a big pole. You just have to balance on it. It's not hovering. It's rolling. It has wheels. Anyway, I don't know why I'm getting so worked up about this, but that's my point. I feel like AI is in the same camp because when you're reading science fiction, you're thinking about artificial intelligence as intelligence that is artificial. Doesn't mean that it's lesser intelligence. It just means that it's not organic brain matter intelligence, right? And to me, and I think to a lot of philosophers, or philosophy in general, is like intelligence or sentience, or whatever you want to call it, is something that perceives the world and creates new and original thoughts. The idea being is that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. In that, the thing about our artificial intelligence is that it's not really thinking. ChatGPT is just Google autofill on steroids. It has ingested trillions of documents of data and has scanned it and learned it all. So when you ask it a question, it's not thinking. It's just trying to predict what's the right word to say one after the other based off the prompts that you've given it. And based off of all the data that it's ingested, right? So there's no thinking. It truly is just the sum of its parts. It's a very impressive sum, but ultimately it's not more than the sum of its parts. It's like this 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing. This spark of inspiration that, ChatGPT will never come up with a novel idea. It might come up with an idea you've never seen, but by definition, all it's doing is pulling from things it's already read. Some would argue, well, isn't that what humans do? We're just the sum of our experiences. I would argue no. I think there's something. And if you're religious, that's your soul or God. If you're not religious, something about higher intelligence, right? If you just want to look at it from a scientific standpoint. So to answer your question, so long story short, no, I don't think that AI is truly AI. Just because it's not intelligent, right? It doesn't have the eye of AI. Now, will that arrive? Who knows, right? Because AI is getting exponentially better. Not smarter, but better, right? Because we shouldn't use the word smart because it's not thinking in the way we're using that word, right? At what point does the sum just become the whole? At what point is there, and they talk about this, the point of singularity, right? At what point of quality does it flip over, right? And this is a deep existential philosophical question that no one's been able to answer, so I surely am not going to be able to do it on Cinnamon Q So Notes on the News, right? But, you know, it's like the thing with, like, a child. Like, like, a baby is not truly sentient in the way we mean it. An adult is, theoretically. At what point did the sentience turn on? I would wager, I don't think it turned on. I think it's like a fog, and as you get older, the fog gradually starts to clear. It's not like this moment, here they were not sentient, and now all of a sudden, now this human being is sentient. And has rational free will and all this stuff, right? So perhaps artificial intelligence will be like that, in that it's wrong for me to say that ChatGPT is not thinking, but rather it is at such a basic level that it is as it gets better, is slowly sharpening the image, right? It's like a camera lens being out of focus, and it's like the visual information's still there, it's just not being processed correctly yet. But maybe as the technology gets better and better, it's like we slowly start to focus in to the point where the sharpness is there. There's really no binary moment of not sharp and not sharp. It's like the spectrum. So, could AI become intelligent? Yes, I think so. Is it now? No. And that's the end of that. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, let me just grab a quick drink here. Okay. Spencer also asked, do you follow Adam Neely, or at least seen his video on music copyright? No and no. So I saw this question, and I was like, I looked into the video and was gonna watch it, but I was traveling this past week, so I literally got in last night to my apartment like 10 o'clock, and then of course I work full time, so I was not able to watch this video. But at the very least, just for maybe a couple minutes, I can speak to just about music copyright in general. Because it is really weird, and it's you know, exciting, and I do plan on watching this video somewhere because it seems like an interesting video. You know, it makes sense that someone would make a video about this, and it makes sense that people would like it, right? And it would be a popular video. So if you don't understand, so copyright in general is a fascinating legal realm or sphere or whatever you want to call it. Legal topic. But not fascinating because it's complex and interesting. It's fascinating because it's complex and incomprehensible. To the point where there are many rules about copyright that the courts haven't quite actually ruled on. And that's just talking about all copyright. I'm not even talking about music copyright specifically. But music is really interesting, or annoying, because there are multiple copyrights for one thing that you might think there might just be one copyright for. So if you have a song, let's say you're the Beatles, and you have Come Together, that's one of your songs. There is the copyright to the song in an abstract sense. So that might mean the lyrics, the melody, essentially the song on paper, right? The song on paper is not the song, right? You can't hear a piece of paper in the sense of, obviously you can hear paper rustle, but I mean, you know, the song does not come off of the paper in an auditory way. So the concept of the song, what you call the composition, that's one copyright. The official recording, that if I go to Spotify and pull up Come Together, that track, that has its own copyright. So now there's at least two copyrights. And furthermore, I could be wrong, but even going within that first one, there might be the copyright to the lyrics, and then there might be copyright to the composition, and then there might be copyright for both at the same time. So it's this, that, and both. But it definitely, for sure, there's different copyright for the composition and the recording, right? So that's often why in movies you are what's the word? It would not be strange. Oftentimes in movies you'll hear a cover of a famous song, but not the original version. And the reason why is that the copyright to the composition is usually cheaper than the copyright to the original track, like the iconic John Lennon vocals and the Beatles playing the instruments, right? That's going to be way more valuable than just the composition of the song. So you'll see this in animated movies all the time, with like the dance party, the song, or if it's just for the soundtrack, some random no-name band doing a cover of ABC by Jackson 5 or something, right? And the idea is that the studio just hires that band. They want to use ABC, so they commission a musical artist or group to cover the song. Because that's going to be way cheaper than just getting ABC sung by Michael Jackson and his brothers, right? So, unfortunately, no, Spencer, I have not watched this video, but I would really like to at some point. Because it's a really fascinating area, and it just... The fact that it's so complicated usually just benefits people who are already rich. So I feel like, this is a whole other topic for another day, but I feel like there needs to just be a complete reimagining of what copyright law should be. Because the original intention of copyright, going back like hundreds of years with like patents, the idea was it would incentivize people to be innovative. That if you know, okay, if I create an invention and patent it, then I'll be able to make a shit ton of money if it's successful. So the idea is that it would incentivize people to be creative and innovate. The issue has become that the terms that you would own the patent or copyright something has gotten longer and longer and longer, both longer, but then also a lot of times it'll be like now it's like after the person dies plus 75 years. So not only has it grown to 75 years, but people are just living longer. So that was why it was a big deal when Steamboat Willie, not Mickey Mouse, the whole character, but specifically the Steamboat Willie animated short from 1928, it was a big deal when that entered public domain. Because Disney has fought and lobbied for decades to extend copyright as long as possible. That happened in the 90s where it was about to expire. So Disney lobbied Congress, and they passed a new law extending the copyright claim. So again, not only is it lasting longer, but oftentimes these copyrights are being held by corporations. They're not even being held by those creators, really. So it's gone from something to incentivize people to be creative, where you might have a copyright for maybe a decade or two, sometimes even less, to now just being something that corporations cling on for dear life to maximize their profits. So we just need to reimagine copyright in all sectors, and I'm sure music would be no exception. Okay, so let me see. We don't have any more questions. So let me see if I can answer any more of Spencer's questions here. I don't want to take up too much time because I am really hot and starting to kind of feel sick. But let me see. I will just answer one of these. I'll answer one more question and keep it kind of shorter. So he originally asked, what are your favorite animated film YouTubers? I'm not sure how many animated YouTubers I'm watching. Like, I imagine what you mean by that is animated film YouTuber. Yeah, so talking about people that talk about animated films. I don't know how many people like that I follow that just exclusively do that. I know someone I follow, Tunerific Tariq, right? I know he does a lot of stuff on animated films. But I figured I would just shout out some of my favorite YouTubers. Some of these are obviously super famous and well-known and well-respected. Some of these people you may have never heard of. So I'm going to give a few shout-outs. I really like a foundational YouTuber for me is this channel called Geekvolution. So basically evolution, but instead of the E, you would replace the whole word with geek. So Geekvolution. And he's been doing videos since like 2009. And he started basically doing a show called Superhero Rewind, where his goal was to review every single, I think English language, but maybe not, every superhero film ever made. And he started this off in 2009 just as like the superhero boom kind of boomed, right? To the point now where who knows if he'll ever even finish. And his show has become a lot more live stream based, where he doesn't do as much scripted content. He really just kind of do like what I do, but just will talk for like 3 hours just about like a movie or a certain topic or whatever. I've always loved him. He's always been very insightful. So highly recommend go checking that out if you like kind of pop culture and comic books and nerdy kind of stuff. I also really like a YouTuber, Regular Pat, P-A-T, Regular Pat. He's a Kingdom Hearts YouTuber. So Kingdom Hearts is like my favorite video game series. It's like a foundational text for me as a creator. And I've always loved Regular Pat's content. He doesn't have a super large following, but he's pretty big within like the Kingdom Hearts community. He's like appointment television in a sense. Like if he uploads a video, it's like shit. Like within the next day or two, I'm gonna watch that. And I'm trying to think of maybe one more person to shout out here, but I'm blanking. Who else do I watch on this newfangled computer that I have? I also really, really like... someone I've just recently started to really get into is the Golden Bolt, a YouTuber talking about video games. Primarily Sony franchises, and then primarily, I think, like, Ratchet and Clank is, like, really his big thing. So, that's why it's called the Golden Bolt, 'cause I think, like, in those games you collect Golden Bolts. I wouldn't say he's one of my favorites, but I've just been watching a lot of his stuff lately. I watched his, like, God of War video. I watched his original Ratchet and Clank video. That kind of reminds me, maybe I should watch another one tonight. That'd be fun. So those are just like a few of my favorite YouTubers for sure. Oh, we have another question. We have a question I'll answer now. Scott Woodford asks, "Are you gonna try Xbox on Fire Stick?" No, because I don't have the Fire Stick or Fire TV that you would need to do it, and I don't have Xbox Game Pass, so I will not be able to partake in Xbox on Fire Stick. But I did have a video from last week talking about it, so if you haven't had a chance to watch it, viewers, Scott, maybe you have watched it, which is why you're asking me this. Definitely go check out that video, kind of talking about like the implications of that. But I think it's just really cool that that's going to be an option. Now, we'll see how the performance is, like how well are the games going to run on a Fire TV. Like they can't even run fucking Netflix or just any streaming app very well, so it'd be very interesting to see how well that they do. Okay, let's just take a quick look at the films upcoming this weekend. We have Fly Me to the Moon, which is like a romantic comedy about faking the moon landing, I believe. I'm projecting it's gonna make about 12 to 17 million, which actually, even though I'm usually bad at the projections, this actually kind of falls in line with other people, with what other people are saying. So I'm not crazy here. That's what I'm predicting. It's not going to be a huge movie, but it should seem kind of fun. It seems like it has a good kind of cast behind it. And then also the horror movie Longlegs, which I think famously, I don't know if it still does, but it was one of those movies that has like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, which doesn't mean much because if everyone gives your movie a 7, Rotten Tomatoes is based off the percent of people that give it a positive review. So if everyone gives it a 7 out of 10, that would get 100%. Doesn't mean it's a 10 out of 10 movie. It just means that 100% of reviewers thought it was a net positive, right? But anyways, this was one of those movies, right? This is being distributed by Neon, which obviously is an independent, kind of like an A24 type distributor. I'm projecting this is only going to make about 6 to 10 million for the weekend. This is Longlegs is the name of it. I'm not sure if I already said that. Again, a smaller opening, but I think I'm going to see it next week, so I'm pretty excited. I've heard pretty good things, so it's going to be interesting to see, what's all the hubbub. Okay, before wrapping up, I just want to give a few plugs. This isn't my only YouTube channel. I also have a sister channel called Peter Squared, where I cover topics related to film and media entertainment in a more structured, like, video essay format, more produced, if you will. The video I have up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, looking at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, using this old and young version of myself, like these cartoon versions of myself. Please go check it out, go subscribe, go watch the video. It really would be a huge help to grow that channel. You can find it in the link in the description below. I also want to plug the podcast I do with my fiance Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We just wrapped up our season on the Addams Family franchise. In a couple weeks, we're going to get started on the Star Wars franchise, which is very, very exciting. So please go check that out. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to listen to podcasts. You can also just find us in the link in the description below. And then finally, I just want to plug Cinema and Q. So it's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where I write more formal reviews for new films coming out. I've been kind of slacking a little bit just because I've been traveling and the summer's been crazy. My last review came out last week about Inside Out 2. If you want to go check that out, you could definitely, it really would be a huge help to go subscribe to that. Substack, you can find us in the link in the description below, or you can just go to your browser, type in cinemaandqso.substack.com. That's it for this week. Thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please like the live stream. It really does help with the algorithm and helping people find the channel. We're trying to grow the community. We're at 159 subscribers, and I would love to get to 200 before the end of the month, which we should be able to do if kind of we keep on the same rate, but only time will tell. So please subscribe if you're watching this, if you haven't already. Send it to a friend, whatever you got to do. Until next week, thank you all so much for coming. Peace out.